Welcome to the continuation of part 3 of your actions with Trico Charitable Foundation. As I mentioned in the previous part of this session, we're really focusing this conversation in and around testing. At the end of the previous video, we had encouraged you to check out the linked video on Owlet. And for the rest of this conversation, we're really going to focus in on their process of using testing in the development of their venture.
Owlet to me is just like, for a 9-minute video, puts on an absolute clinic of like how to test. So rather than kind of go through the specific test sheet that we're suggesting to you from Trico, I want to just go through some of the kind of principles that we noticed because there is such a wealth of them. So the first thing Owlet kind of did is they did their nurses survey. And they interviewed 58 nurses and they received over 90% indicating that they were interested. And we thought this was a really kind of interesting insight in that they picked 58 nurses. So they could have gone with less than 58. They could have picked, let's say, 20. They could have picked 75. And to me, this kind of flags the key challenge we had with the strategizer sheet, which kind of focused on numbers. And the key insight I want to draw to your attention is a target number only matters if you know why it matters. So if you can't explain why you're focusing on a particular number for your test, don't worry about it. Like if it's an artificial number, just accept the reality that it's an artificial number and note that. Don't spend any time kind of sweating out an artificial number if you don't know why it matters. And the second point about this was affordable loss. And if you recall when I talked last week, affordable loss is this idea from Sarah Sarasvathy. And the idea that although most of us tend to focus on what we can gain by trying something, she suggests you focus on affordable loss, which is what you can afford to lose as a result of kind of doing this. And the key insight here is if you're getting targets or anything exactly right, that matters actually less if you're staying within the affordable loss area. So as long as you're within affordable loss, whether it's 58, 20, 75 matters less, because being wrong about that is not going to kill you. And again, notice the Owlet video, they didn't really explain why they picked 58 nurses, but because they weren't spending anything and it only took a week, it was safe to either get it right or get it wrong. But also notice, even though they got information they really liked, which is more than a 90% approval rating, they didn't go, okay, now let's get investing for idea, or let's invest in a factory to build it. They stayed within affordable loss and continued testing by now speaking to administrators. And of course, what they found is administrators did not like the idea at all. And what's really interesting is how they responded. They responded by changing their view of how the world works. They concluded, based on this data, customers don't want this. We're not going to be able to sell it. Consider as well the how they work option. So they could easily have said, maybe the problem is we're not doing this properly ourselves. We're executing wrong. So we're picking the wrong administrators. Maybe we're pitching the administrators wrong. They actually had the choice between, are the results causing us to change our view of how the world works or how they actually work? And they picked, we're going to change our view of how the world works. We just can't sell this. But they did have a key insight in how they worked, and that they realized they made a mistake of confusing the user with the customer. Now, this is actually a huge mistake and can be actually fatal. But for them, it wasn't, because again, they stayed within affordable loss. So again, never forget that as long as you're staying within affordable loss, of course, you're going to always do your best to avoid mistakes, but it makes mistakes survivable. And that's kind of the key thing to do. So they pivoted away from the wireless pulse oximeter and decided to do kind of baby alarms. And they identified there were two risks to that. There was the market risk of will people buy it, and the technology risk to can they build it. And they picked the market risk to explore first because they thought it was easier and they thought it was more important. And what's interesting in Owlet is a lot of times they make decisions on what's easier, which would drive a lot of maybe coaches and mentors to distraction, like why are you doing something because it's easier? And again, note they can do that because they're within affordable laws. Again, picking wrong, i.e., should I focus on my market risk or technology risk, is not such a crucial decision if you can afford to be wrong, i.e., I should have picked technology first. So again, if you're in the affordable loss zone, think about things, but don't sweat the choice too much. The next kind of major insight that we got from the Owlet video is they surveyed 105 mothers to see if they would be interested in purchasing essentially the baby alarm. And again, they got an over 90% interest rate, which is really great. But then they did something that was absolutely fascinating. They tested the idea in a different way with kind of like a different audience. So they did a class project MVP where they actually had a video online to get essentially the same information that they had already got from the 105 mothers they surveyed. So you could ask the question, was doing the online video and seeing the clicks they got and the interest they got actually overkill? Because they had surveyed 105 mothers, which is a lot, and had an over 90% interest rating. But again, the answer is no. Given affordable loss, they could do it. As they say, the additional kind of experimentation on essentially the same issue, i.e., are people interested in this product, was possible for them because it cost virtually nothing. But look at what they gained from the online kind of video versus the surveys of mothers. They got all this incredible interest, they got incredible media coverage, and they got 15 distributors who were interested in working with their project, two of which they actually ultimately decided to kind of work with. So again, the power of affordable loss and getting different perspectives on the same issue can be really and surprisingly powerful. But we could ask ourselves, what if they'd actually got a bad response on the video? Again, they could have had two choices to make. One is we change our worldview, which is, oh, we conclude there's no market. Or they could have said, no, 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 it's our execution. We need a better video. And that's obviously an issue of how they work. And again, I just want to bring home as you kind of parse through what exactly Owlet did, it reinforces this notion that with almost every test result, you're going to have to think through, wait a sec, are the results kind of either confirming or denying our worldview, or is it giving us information that we need to do things better or that we're executing very well? The next thing they focused on is how to reach customers. And again, initially they thought it would be through hospitals. But again, their process shifted their worldview, where they again concluded retail stores are a better choice. Again, I just want to drive home one more time. They could easily have focused on it being a how they work issue. So let's fix how we approach hospitals. Are we picking the wrong hospitals? Do we have the wrong pitch? Is there something wrong with the way we're pitching? You're always going to have that choice, and you need to kind of be aware of which path you want to go down based on your test results. So then they moved on to the cost of goods sold, which is their COGS of $40 to $60, and then their pricing, which was going to be $200. So though they didn't use this language, note that this is an example of steady state and zooming out. Because they thought at the end of the road where they want to be, of figuring out what their cost of goods sold of 40 to 60, that kind of informed their journey. And again, that's the kind of big takeoff of steady state and zooming out. Historically, people have thought looking at your goals of steady state and zooming out is about predicting. It's less about predicting and more about kind of informing what you need to test through your journey to kind of confirm your assumptions. So based on their price point of 200 and their COGS, they actually did surveys. And their conclusion was their initial feeling was no one's going to pay $200 for this. Maybe we can rent it. And what's interesting, their initial surveys confirmed exactly that, is people were more inclined to actually rent at a $200 price point than actually pay for it. But again, they did something really interesting. They didn't just accept that. They then did this additional information process of actually going to stores and speaking to customers. And again, there's this kind of hidden insight with the Owlet video that actually double checking data with a different approach really helps. So again, even though they were getting the information that was confirming their thinking, they tried a different approach and were able to get absolutely crucial information that caused them to actually pivot and realize not only could they charge $200, but they could charge more. But again, through the process, they also got a key how they work insight, which is there's a difference in the survey asking how much do you expect to pay versus a survey asking how much you would pay. Now, at this point, some of you may say, well, hold on a sec. Differentiating between how we work and how the world work can be confusing because, for example, maybe learning expecting to pay versus how much you would pay in a survey is different is telling us the way the world works is people will respond differently when asked what do you expect to pay versus how much you would pay. And yes, it is true that sometimes figuring out whether you're in the how you work zone versus how the world works zone can be difficult. But note these things. Number one, the fact that you're alive to the distinction is going to be a powerful tool for you as you kind of experiment and move along your journey. Number two, yes, it can be difficult, but the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Number three, as long as you stay within the affordable loss zone, sometimes differentiating between whether you're in the how you work zone versus how the world works zone is not that big a deal. And finally, the biggest way to kind of differentiate between whether you're in the how the world works zone or how you work zone is, are you looking at questions of how you can do better versus, yeah, we've known we're doing this really good. And because of that, this is what should happen because that's the way the world works. So anytime you're talking about how you can improve doing things, i.e. getting execution better, you're in the how you work zone. When you're in the, oh, this should be happening because we did it right, you're now in the how the world works zone. The next came up was they decided their next issue was their wireless transmission. And they literally say in the video, between these two risks, which is pulse oximetry and wireless transmission, we're going to do wireless transmission because it was easier. They literally said that. And again, that may seem like a flawed way to make decisions on choices. But again, if you're in the affordable loss zone, you can afford not to sweat which one you want to pick. After their information, they went back to the hospital to see if their initial kind of design for what would actually go on the child's foot was correct. And they learned very quickly that their design wasn't working. And again, note the choice they made. They quickly changed their worldview, saying, we can't build this. We have to move to a SOC model versus how they work, where they could easily have said, oh, we need to get better at design. If we could just better design, like how we execute, we could fix this. So again, just see the many, many times where Owlet had results from tests and they had to make that decision of do we change our worldview or do we change how we work? Finally, I want to talk about their, next thing I want to talk about actually is FDA. And that, if you recall in the video, was a huge surprise for them. Just want to flag for you, they may have actually avoided this nasty surprise of all the costs and complications that were entailed by getting FDA approval if they had zoomed out. Again, that's the benefit of zooming out, is looking a little bit down the road, thinking what your possible risks are, and just making you alive to them. But again, in this situation, it was no biggie for them, as they had always stayed in affordable loss. So even though it was a nasty surprise and kind of took them off guard, they could easily survive it because they always stayed within affordable loss, i.e., they didn't spend a lot of time necessarily, and they certainly didn't spend a lot of time, money, and didn't commit themselves. Now, at this point, you may be saying, can't help but notice that Outlet is doing lots of pivots. So their first idea was to have the wireless pulse oximetry for patients in general. They moved away from that. Then they wanted to do baby alarms. Then they moved away from that and just had this kind of this data collection point for babies. If they're moving away from their why so much, maybe the why isn't that important. And that's a challenge with a lot of these concepts, in that there's no set answer as to how many whys you can change or how specific they need to be. The really key guide to why zone is, as long as your why still inspires you and is guiding your decisions, you're on the right track. And notice that Outlet changed their whys many times, but you can clearly tell from the way they're experimenting and their passion at the beginning of the presentation, at the end, in terms of making babies' lives safer, that they were always kind of inspired by their why, no matter how many times it changed. The current why they had was still inspiring them, and it was always kind of guiding their journey. So again, don't go kind of high level on there can only be so many why changes, or it needs to be this kind of why. The key answer is what works for you, in the sense of it's inspiring you and guiding you. Their next kind of stage in their experiment journey was they decided on the kind of data monitoring tool for babies. And they actually surveyed people again. This time it was 81 people, and they got a result of 20% like it, which interestingly is very different from most of the results were 90%. 20% is a substantial drop. But notice in the video, they were actually quite happy with the 20%. Again, that just brings home the numbers issue, which is only sweat selecting a specific target if you have a reason to. Again, they could have burned a lot of time and a lot of debate as a team of, hey, do we shoot for 90% again in the survey, 70%, 30, 10, whatever. If it's a number that serves your purposes and you don't have a logical reason for picking that specific number, don't sweat it. And particularly don't sweat it if you're still staying within your affordable loss zone, which Outlet always did. What's also interesting in this process is not only did they kind of gain kind of validation, but they also gained some information about how the world works, which is there are different kind of mums. So remember what they said in the video, there's mums who actually are less worried and would find the alarms actually disturbing versus other mothers. So going through this experiment taught them how the world works differently. But of course, they're going to harness those insights of how the world works to inform how they work, which is we're going to initially target moms who are less worried with a specific product that doesn't have an alarm. Then eventually we're going to build towards mothers that are more worried and does have an alarm. So notice all they did, like all these experiments, and at least 4 major pivots. In fact, they were so major they had to go back and survey different customers or customers differently because they had changed so much. But they still did all this within an affordable loss zone where they only spent $1,150, 24 weeks. And what I'm hoping this process shows you is, rather than just simply seeing the video of, oh, okay, they're very good at experiments, and I get how experimentation is important, and maybe the business model canvas could be useful, you now have, through kind of like the technique that we're suggesting to you, a different way and a new framework to kind of understand how they actually did it. So for example, where numbers matter and when they don't, and you don't need to sweat them. When choices matter and when you don't need to sweat them because of affordable loss. Or where you're forced with results to think about, do you need to change your worldview versus changing how you actually do things.
Thank you for joining us today. This session was really focused in on the testing process, and we introduced the testing tool that you'll see below. The goal of testing is to learn as effectively as possible before you take risks and to help you mitigate those risks on your journey up to the mountain. What I want to note about this process, like we said at the beginning of the videos, is that testing is applicable beyond the zoom-in process and can be used in a number of ways. We hope that this video introduced a number of ways that it can be used and also let you understand how it can be used as a tool to move your idea forward. This actually brings us to the end of the Assess tools. And overall, this process has really been focused in on helping you move your social enterprise idea forward as safely and effectively as possible. There's a number of things that you can learn before you're on the mountain. And as we discussed in areas like rethinking social entrepreneurship, there's no one way to have social impact. The goal is to talk about the potential of social entrepreneurship and understanding that there are different ways to using markets for social good. Overall, I hope that this process has allowed you to dig deeper into your social enterprise idea and has helped you have a number of meaningful conversations with your team and those around you about what your goals are and how you will proceed as safely as possible as you look to use markets for social good. Thank you for joining us.